Hi, students. I hope you're doing well. We are coming into a new week, and we have got a lot to unpack this week. We're jumping into some in-rock stuff, and I really want to first highlight some of these major key points that you need to know as you start stepping into your first essay, whether you're in my class or whether you're in another instructor's 111 class. I want to be able to kind of help you understand the different modes of writing and why they matter, and then break that down in terms of practical knowledge for how to move forward with that essay. So, first of all, let's talk about the idea of modes and rhetoric. So, when we talk about what is rhetoric, rhetoric is the art of communication with an audience. For writers, rhetoric means that the writer tries to communicate with the readers using literary devices and compositional techniques. There are many modes of rhetorical writing. So, essentially, rhetoric is how we communicate, okay? And to give you an idea of what this means in a practical sense, when you think about communicating with the different people in your life, whether we realize it or not subconsciously, we communicate differently. So, for example, when I am talking to my children's teacher, I'm going to be talking like I'm speaking to you. They are my peer. In a way, they are above my child, and so I'm communicating to them in a way of understanding and adult to adult. And that is going to be very different than when I'm communicating with my 2-year-old child. And the words that I'm going to use are going to be different. The way that I express myself might be different. Even down to my tone of voice might change. I may talk really gently and sweetly and maybe even giggle a little bit to try to communicate something with my 2-year-old, where I'm going to have a little bit more professionalism, right, with that school teacher. So it's the art of how we communicate. Um, and then modes are the different aspects, the different areas. So, again, for example, in a practical sense, 2-year-old versus teacher. Okay, those are two different modes, two different purposes, two different audiences. So, the four most common modes of writing are description, expository, narration, and persuasive. And we're going to break those down because within those modes, there are tons of different types of papers. And not just papers, but materials that you will read, writings that you will read, and so forth. It's important that you understand that you can use more than one mode for the same written work. Learning the basics of each mode will come in handy when you're writing. It will greatly improve your understanding of your readers and how they retain information. Guys, not only learning different modes will help you as a writer, but it's also going to help you as a reader when you learn the nuts and bolts of a compare contrast, a narration, a cause and effect, a research essay. Learning the nuts and the bolts of those different essays are not only going to help you learn how to write those essays, but it's going to help you be more confident as a reader to understand why those types of essays exist. For NROC, for the first NROC that we're going to be doing, which is our software that I talked to you about at the beginning of the semester, you're going to be doing a compare and contrast. There's lots of different reasons that you compare and contrast. Maybe you're trying to make two different decisions. And so you're comparing and contrasting different decisions that you may have to make or different ideas that you need to think through. Maybe you're trying to decide if something is better. Maybe you're trying to look at two different pieces of literature or research to come to a different understanding or idea. That's a compare and contrast. However, you might be writing a narrative, okay? And a narrative's objective or a narrative's overall idea is to tell a story or to communicate a message. So again, these different modes of writing, they help us communicate a different message and a different purpose. But as readers, it also helps us understand how we're supposed to interpret those different messages. So when we break that down into introductions, okay, you may think, well, how can I possibly learn how to write introductions? for 10 different types of paper. How can I learn how to write an introduction for a compare and contrast, a narrative, a cause and effect, a research paper? And here's the good news. The foundations of introductions don't change. Okay. So, what I mean by that is there are certain things that we have to think about when we think about introductions, because the introduction is the start of our paper. Okay. What is our tone going to be for this paper? Okay. And what I mean by that is, who are you communicating to, and how does that change the tone of your writing? Okay, if you're communicating to an academic audience, the chances are you're going to use very structured sentences. You're not going to use any contractions like can't or shouldn't or wouldn't, because everything is going to be very formal. You're going to be using a higher level of vocabulary, and your tone in your writing is going to strategically be more academic. That's also going to lead into, how do you approach your thesis? Okay. For a compare and contrast essay, your thesis statement should compare and contrast the two different ideas that you're going to unpack. And it should also show the greater message of what you're going to be teaching in that compare and contrast. However, if you're doing a narrative, okay, and you're telling a story, that thesis might be more implied, or it may, what it might do is it may forebode something that you're going to tell, but it might not be as explicit as that compare and contrast. For a cause and effect essay, okay, that thesis statement should show the various causes that lead to the effect. So when we think about thesis statements, okay, the introduction should always have a thesis, right? The thesis is the foundation of the paper, but that thesis may look a little different contingent on what type of essay you're writing. The next thing is the purpose. For each mode of writing, your purpose is going to change. Again, and I keep going back to compare and contrast, but if you're doing that, what is the message you're trying to do? Are you comparing and contrasting two colleges that you're going to? Because that's going to look very different than if you're trying to convince your reader that instead of using plastics and papers, that they should switch over to something more permanent, like glass, so that they're not populating the landfill. Again, you have to think of what is the main message here, and that is going to spill over into everything that you write in that introduction. And then finally, another thing you have to consider is your audience. Okay, who are you speaking to? And I go back to that example of the 2-year-old and the teacher. Contingent on who you're talking to, that's going to change the type of language you're using, your sentence structures, the tone of academia, or whether it's more casual. Who are you talking to? In the case, if you're in my English 111 class, the first essay you're writing is a eulogy essay. Well, when we think about audience, that's going to be someone that you deeply care about. You're going to be communicating to people who've known you your whole life, and you meant so much to them that they're at your funeral. So that is going to change the language. It's not going to be super formal. You're not going to be catering to an academic audience. However, let's say you're in another English 111 class that's not mine, and maybe the first essay you're writing is a cause and effect essay, and it's over a political issue. Okay. That's a more serious topic. That's a serious tone. And the foundations of that introduction, the audience that you're gearing towards are people who are involved in politics. And more likely than not, those people typically have a different level of education, or they're people that desire to be educated over important topics and things that need to be changed about their world. So your language is going to be different to them. And again, guys, these are just different things that you have to consider before you start your paper. What should my tone be here? When I think about my thesis statement, what nuts and bolts need to be in my main message? What is the purpose? Okay, what is the main goal that I'm trying to achieve in this essay? And who am I speaking to? Those are the really important aspects to consider before you ever start putting a pen to paper. So then let's talk about what should be in your introduction. Okay, when you're finished with your introduction, what boxes should you be able to check off? No matter what introduction you are writing, you should have a hook. you should have a transition, and you should have a thesis statement. The way these ideas are written will depend on your mode, purpose, and audience. A hook is going to be how you grab the reader's attention, something that engages them to make you want to read the work. Transition is some of that background information of the essay. What is important for them to know before they begin? And then your thesis statement, of course, is the main message of your paper. A thesis statement can be one or two things. It can be implied, okay, or it can be explicit. Talk to your instructors, whether you're in my class or whether you're in another class. It's always a good question to say, what kind of thesis do you prefer? Do you prefer an implied thesis, or do you expect our thesis statement to be explicit? An implied can often be in something like a narrative essay. Maybe you don't exactly tell what the story is going to be about, but maybe you say, that was a day that she would never forget. Okay. And so it implies that you are telling about a memory or something that forebodes that something's coming. Okay. And so you know that a story is going to be told, but you don't exactly know the message. However, if you're writing an essay like a research essay, or you're trying to prove a point, you're writing an argumentative essay, in the introduction, you're going to need to be very clear about what that argument is. It doesn't make as much sense to do an implied thesis where you're leaving the reader guessing. You want them to know from the very beginning. So then moving on to conclusions, okay, we've talked about what do we have to think about before we ever start the paper, what should be in our introductions, and now we're going to talk about conclusions, what should be in your conclusion. Regardless of what kind of conclusion you're writing, you should always restate your thesis using different words. Don't copy and paste and just stick it at the end of your paper. Figure out another creative way to engage your audience and say it again. Highlight the key points that were used in your essay, revisit some of those main points, and then finally, never give new information. The conclusion is to wrap things up. It's not to produce new. So why does all of this matter? You can be confident no matter what type of essay you are writing, whether you are coming into my class and you're starting with your eulogy essay, or whether you're in another class and you're starting to create an argumentative essay or a compare and contrast essay or a cause and effect essay. Knowing what you have to think about, what should be included in your introduction and what should be included in your conclusion can help you know some fundamental things that you can start thinking about to get started. Have a plan of action and bullet point the different key parts. Okay, ask yourself, do I have a hook? Do I have a transition? Do I have a thesis? And then when you get to the conclusion, ask yourself, have I restated my conclusion, my thesis statement, my conclusion? Have I highlighted those key points again? Do I have any new information that really doesn't belong here? These can help you be confident no matter what genre or mode of essay you are writing. This is going to lead to the next lecture, which is called Common Language. And guys, common language is going to break down the different parts of an essay, the introduction, and it's going to go into it a little bit deeper. And it's not going to talk so much about the modes, but it's going to talk about what nuts and bolts should be in an introduction, the body paragraphs of your essay, and the conclusion. And you're even going to get to see some examples in that particular lecture. I hope this is really helpful as you move into your NROC and as well your first essay, whether you're in my English 111 class or whether you're in another professor's English course. If you have any questions about these concepts, please don't hesitate to reach out and let's make it another great week together.